Get the show on the road.
Okay. What would
Okay.
you like to discuss today?
Well, I do remember last time we had a discussion. You said you wanted to ask some questions about my YouTube channel, which the old username was Gynocentrism Watch. One of the reasons I changed the name is just because that was too difficult for people to say. I mean, you couldn't
Yeah,
pronounce.
I butchered it.
You could. You're not the like a lot of people screwed that up, and also it's like it was meant to be a placeholder. I couldn't think of a real good name, so then I changed it to something really simple like Amnet. Amnet is it's a 1984 joke. Amnet is shorthand for American nationalism, but it's kind of like it's it's a joke in the same way that ingsoc is English socialism, because like George Orwell was a self-described socialist, and uh, Oceania and ingsoc are supposedly not socialist in the way that he was. And so me naming myself Amnat was meant to be a joke, because it's like I kind of am a nationalist, but uh, maybe not really. I'm actually kind of not 100% sure what politics I'm relatively consistent on, aside from being like a men's rights activist. So
Well, you don't really sound like a nationalist. Not in the conversations we've had on Reddit, but we can discuss that later.
yeah,
So you're talking about men's rights. In what way?
well, based on what I've experienced and seen, it does seem like we do deal with a lot of problems, and I always feel I on the one hand I do kind of feel somewhat squeamish talking about these things, because people don't really take those of us who are men's rights activists seriously. But there are issues that we do want to have addressed, and I like having rights. I'm not interested in being the target of sex discrimination. That doesn't mean that I don't care when it happens to women. I'm just advocating for my own interests.
And that's fair. And that's fair. Yeah. And I know it can be a difficult subject to discuss because you could easily go towards the incel way or something like that, and that's why it's difficult to talk about or discuss.
Yeah, I get that a lot, because like people see that I'm like in the men's rights sphere, and and I've gotten a lot of questions about the incel stuff. Well, there was a I did a discussion like almost 3 years ago with this self-described Marxist, and that video, it's not on my YouTube or MGTOW.tv channels anymore. It's well, I mean, I have a bunch of different channels on a bunch of different websites. It's still on my BitChute channel, and he was asking me about the incel stuff. I don't mind talking about the incel stuff. The funny thing is when I used to be part of a questionable men's rights group, they actually got mad at me for even talking about the incels, not because they felt insulted, but it's because they looked at incels as being controlled opposition, and that I shouldn't give them any attention. But now that I've no ties to any particular group, I have no qualms talking about the incel stuff and giving my takes on it if you're curious.
Yeah, yeah. The problem with when discussing men's rights is that incels often hijack the discussions regarding men's rights because you could easily have discussions about rights in society for men without being an attack on women.
Yeah, I mean there are some people who call themselves men's rights activists, and their whole and like anybody can call themselves that, but there's some out there their whole point is just to make life miserable for women. Some you get unscrupulous people on the left who try to claim that people like Andrew Tate and Roosh V are men's rights activists, and it's like no, they are not. They're something different completely. Just because we're all grouped in this grouping by the Southern Poverty Law Center called the Manosphere doesn't mean that we do the same things.
You're not all pedos,
Definitely not.
or what we should call him, a big bastard.
I mean, like Andrew Tate is just so ridiculous to me because it's like this guy, like he's been accused of some pretty serious crimes and he's been like evading capture for quite a long time. It's like he actually did get captured in Romania just because he was dumb enough to get baited by Greta Thunberg. Like I think Greta Thunberg is a cringy individual, but like
She is.
I saw Andrew Tate's response video to her and he reeked of insecurity and it's just like bro, you're not you don't look like a strong man. You don't look confident at all. Like the way he was talking and the fact that he was making a whole response video to it, it's like the only way that this is not utterly idiotic is if it was a farm engagement because a lot of people on the internet whose success is dependent on how much attention they can get from people, they will deliberately stir up controversy just to get people to watch them. Twitch streamers are notorious for this. And then he
It's
gets them.
true.
I'm sorry.
It's true. I agree with that.
And like I was never enthralled by the likes of Andrew Tate because I am an egalitarian. I don't really care for the people that are advocating for one sex being having complete power over the other. I just think, but the thing is that on the internet, at least, a lot of on the internet and with a lot of corporations, uh, male supremacists tend to get severely punished on the internet, like websites such as Reddit, YouTube, uh, Twitter, at least at least in the past. Definitely Instagram. They like these companies will specifically target like pro male groups, but you have like misandrist female supremacist groups who or individuals who post all kinds of misandrist shit and sometimes even engage in incitement, and they get away with it because these companies are just on their side. That's one of the reasons I call myself like a men's rights activist. And so because I actually did get involved in local politics, so I can call myself an activist, and I tried getting my way. I don't want to go too deep into it, but that political career fizzled out, not because of the MRA stuff, but it was actually just because like I wasn't towing the line of the Republican Party at 100%. Like I disagreed. Like they wanted me to be an anti-vaxxer, they wanted me to be anti-abortion, and I wasn't willing to do those things. And at first they were okay with it until I won a primary, and then then they decided to purge me. I didn't mean to go too far
Oh
off
no,
topic.
that's right. That's okay. So
Did you want to talk
where
about
do
the
you
incel
think?
stuff?
What? No, no. The insult things is a side category. I don't think we need to talk anymore about it.
Okay.
As long as we agree that men's rights and incel is not the same,
Yeah, they're not the
and
same
it
thing.
is often and it's often hijacked by the incel groups. So if we talk about men's rights in general, or where do you think there are lacking rights for men in America?
Well, there are incidents that take place. I mean, there's a number of different things. So, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 that the Trump administration passed had a provision in there that made it so that men could know, like there's a number of different things, like cuz somebody could like listen to me rattle off the things that I'm bringing up, the issues I'm bringing up and say, "Oh, that's a one-off example." I've got plenty of examples of problems, and it's due to a generalized view that men should always provide the money. Men should be like subjected to basically being a uh, what do you
A breadwinner.
like a pack horse almost. And the thing
Yeah.
is, it's like this is not the 1950s anymore. Women are allowed to be employed. I mean, I guess there was no law in the book saying women are not allowed to be employed, but nobody would employ women. They could, discriminate against them. That dynamic has completely changed. There are lots of women. They go to universities. They get their degrees and they get powerful positions in companies and governments. And I've worked at corporations where they just overtly favored women over men, where to the point where it was basically sex discrimination. But the one where it was like really bad, they controlled all the, like, it was an insulated like uh, warehouse where they controlled all of the security cameras. They wouldn't allow anyone to record anything, and it's like their word versus yours. So you better have a lot of like witnesses on your side. It was UPS, which is the company that I'm referring to. There was like it wasn't even like it's not even speculation. Like, it was well known that the people in positions of power, full-time supervisors, managers, etc., that they just overtly discriminate in women's favor over men because they want to have more women in the company, and they'll do anything unscrupulous in order to achieve that, even if the women they're getting are like really shitty people. So
So why is that? Why would they want more women in the jobs instead of equally men and women the best for the job?
so there's two
But
reasons.
what are the reasons?
There are two reasons why they want to do that. The people the So there's a lot of male supervisors in lower positions in the company, and then there are a few like misandrists in those positions as well. And the guys, and from what I've seen personally, they just want to be surrounded by women, and they look at male um, male grunt workers as being in their way. So they're trying to phase out the male workforce and replace them with women. The thing is that women generally don't want to work in that kind of environment. So like they'll work there for maybe a few months or a year or so, and then they leave because they don't like the environment. I left because I didn't like the environment. Like, I didn't like the that dynamic. As for like management, like the corporate sector, they're trying to virtue signal how like woke they are by putting women in powerful positions. And whether you believe, and like whether the case is sexism, whether it's like a patriarchal kind of sexism, or if it's a misandrist kind of sexism, or just you uh, if it's just like perverted men who just want to be surrounded with women, whatever the case may be, it was all to my detriment. So I'm against it.
Yeah, of course. So, is there any statistics or anything on a societal state instead of these examples? Um, just so we can discuss if it's a societal problem or if it's a problem in a few corporations with bad management.
Okay. So I do remember reading a article. I don't know if this is the correct article, that there was an uptick in women. I mean, this is slightly different, but this is pretty on topic because we're talking about a generalized problem. There was an uptick in women using stealing the sperm of their male partners in order to become pregnant without the consent of the man that they're with, in order to trap them into non-consensual fatherhood and, by extension, child support. I think that this is the study that I found. I could be wrong. Well, this is not really a study. This is an article pointing out the thing.
Yeah. So mm, it's a bit off topic, yeah. So if we can park that heat there and return to the stealing of sperm a bit later. So if we return to inequality in the work environment instead. Um, I'm just trying to see if there's any statistics in the US for how many percentage of women you have in leadership of business.
Well, I don't know.
Uh,
So the number, I wouldn't be surprised if it's still mostly male, but I wouldn't see how that would justify sex discrimination against me.
of course not. Of course not. That I'm just trying to find out if it's bad leadership in the company or if it's a societal problem. So I understand that what you've seen and felt is a kind of discrimination, and it's just not okay. Um, but in order to discuss if it's a problem in which you as a society are able to do something about it, there must be something backing it up, where you can show that it is a bigger problem, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just that one company that I experienced something like that. Like I was at for like about a month. I worked at a in a little factory where the manager was basically protecting this one woman who was incredibly toxic, engaging in workplace harassment. I mean, that's not. And here's the thing: that's not part of a study. That's not like that's. It's not like he's part of like a wider conspiracy, but it's more like, sorry, it's more. How am I? I'm trying to think of the right words to say. It's entirely possible it's a lot of sexist men who are just trying to empower certain like unscrupulous women for whatever purpose. It could be that they just want to be surrounded by like these kinds of people. But I do think that in the case of UPS, like they did have like a DEI initiative that was probably pouring gasoline on the fire there. As for like a wider societal problem, well, here's the thing: is that in universities in the United States, and this is, I do remember reading a study somewhere years ago, and I really apologize for not having it on hand, but I do recall years ago reading somewhere that like there like you do have like a lot more people with left wing politics graduating from universities and then getting like high paying jobs. I so there are a lot of universities in the United States that have very uh, left liberal progressive woke politics. These people they graduate from these universities, they get into powerful positions in corporations, and then they take they use their politics, impose their politics using their positions of power. I actually, and this is not something that I can really show anybody, but I know someone personally, a guy that I went to middle school and high school with, who I used to be friends with. We're not friends anymore, but he went to a university, got like a psych degree, and he went on to be in a corporate position in this company. Oh, I kind of just doxed myself by saying like what specific city it was, but
Yeah, beep it if you're going to put it up on the internet, and then
I
just beep it.
I'll edit that out later.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fine.
because this is not live, I'm gonna edit the shit out later, and I can just edit out
Yeah, so,
certain things. Anyway, um, he is in a corporate position in this company in a major city, but it's in a part of the city that's like heavily protected by law enforcement. The thing that we stopped being friends over is about 5 years ago. He was calling for like there was like the whole like Black Lives Matter protests, and you know there are peaceful protesters, but there was also violent protesters, people doing property destruction, people vandalizing stores and homes, writing graffiti all over it. And he had like a picture of graffiti on somebody's store, um, saying Black Lives fucking matter, and he had that as his cover photo on Facebook. Now he and I had talked about politics like 3 years prior, and like for the previous 3 years, and he seemed to be more like a free love hippie liberal, not anywhere near this like authoritarian or toxic. So I was like, yo, what the fuck? And I confronted him about it, not in person because we hadn't met in person in a long time, but I started questioning him about it, and he in no uncertain terms just overtly voiced support for rioting and looting. And I just tried asking him, okay, well, how is rioting, how is looting like the businesses of disadvantaged minorities helping black people not get killed in encounters with police? And he's like, it's not my job to educate you, do your own research. And he's a white man, so it's like you can't use the argument of, oh, he doesn't want to bring up past painful experiences, because like every black person I ever talked to about race issues, they're happy to talk about these things. It's like white liberals in my experience that don't like talking about it. And he and I got into this argument about it, and it kind of just ended there. And later on, he stopped being like, he officially cut things off when I voiced support for Kyle Rittenhouse defending himself against a domestic abuser, a child molester, and some other violent criminal trying to kill him. But honestly, like I don't feel bad that he's out of my life. But I went and looked up his LinkedIn page, and he is in a management position in a finance company in a safe part of a major city. So it's like he's not going to be the victim of attacks or anything like that. And when I was canvassing, when I was involved in local politics, um, another canvasser was trying to aim for like wealthier areas, because like the Republican Party is usually seen as being the pro wealthy person party, and she got like a very hostile reception. They kicked her out, and she's like, I don't understand why these wealthy people are so opposed to like Republican canvassing. I explained to her, because the kind of people that are going to universities nowadays are people with left liberal politics, or they're the ones that don't get kicked out. They get these degrees, they go into corporate positions, and then boom, they control society. And they got very woke politics. Um, because in the conservative movement right now, and in the Republican Party, one thing that I saw a lot of is people saying like, yeah, don't bother going to college. It's a waste of time and money. Go and do trades, do blue collar work and stuff like that. So like, and you could argue that's not a study. That's not like that's just a personal observation. It's conjecture. I can't really prove those personal experiences to you, but it's enough to motivate myself. And maybe it's kind of hard for me to pull up like study off just off the cuff like that, because like I didn't come 100% prepared with like a list of every study that I was going to need. Like in discussions like this, like fact checking is very hard to do and pretty much
Of
impossible
course,
in real time.
of course. Just to pick this from the start. The prince is obviously an idiot. He's an idiot, and you don't need education to be an idiot.
Hmm.
If he's trying to tell you that
I mean, I will.
he doesn't want to tell you why it's okay to graffiti someone's property. If he thinks that he's a radical,
Oh yeah.
it's not about education level. This is about radicalization in a group of people. And I don't think it's necessarily in colleges that you are um, radicalized. It's a certain kind of group where you are not met with um, any kind of question, where you all agree that what you're discussing, you all agree on what you're discussing. It's becoming an echo chamber. So it's really really important that whether you're a Republican or you are a liberal or you are a radical socialist or whatever, it's important that you are able to discuss difference in opinion, and it's important to be able to excuse your own actions. So if you find it okay to riot, then you have to be able to explain rioting is good for the people that I'm representing or I'm trying to represent. But he's not able to do that because it's he. Some people need to understand, especially on the fringes, that you're not able to make change by having only negative publicity. So you could easily have a fine discussion about how black people are treated in the United States, especially by law enforcement. But if you're trying to start violence or riots, you're losing the discussion because you're not being taken seriously. And if we have to talk about Rittenhouse, so uh, I believe it's a bit muddy. Rittenhouse was traveling through state lines with a gun. He went to an a demonstration or whatever with guns and wanted to be there. I believe that he had the intention, or at least he was not against using violence, and that's a problem. But he did he did not break any laws because they were violent to him, and the law is the law in that state. So it was not against the law that he defended himself. They were violent to him, and he defended himself.
Yeah. One of the and like I mentioned before, one of the guys that Rittenhouse killed in self-defense was also a child molester. So, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But if if we have to be, if we live in a society of laws, it is not for people to be vigilantes and take law into their own hand. It is for the courts to decide.
the only problem with that, like, I'm glad that the judge ruled in Rittenhouse's favor, but I think that the rule of law in the United States is slowly starting to break down, and I'm not sure if I'm not like it could just be that we're going through a rough patch at the moment, but with with the way things have been going for I would say actually the past few decades, I think we're starting to lose the things about this country that made it worth living in. And it could be that this is just me being catastrophizing and maybe things will get better. Cuz like I mean, decades ago, I don't I think this I don't know if this started with the Reagan administration or the Bush administration. Just I mean, there was the Patriot Act back in the early 2000s where we now have surveillance on American citizens, and some speculate that's how they caught. That's the real reason they managed to catch Luigi Mangione in such a questionable way. And I don't want to go too far off on a tangent on that, but there's it seems like there is an increasing we're having an increasing amount of authoritarianism in this country. Donald Trump is a big culprit in this. Like he has demonstrated that he can have who are potentially Americans just sent off to into a labor camp in El Salvador. He could just ignore the judges, and the Supreme Court can't like send the marshals after him to arrest him. So what it's demonstrating is that there's always been for decades we've had a problem of a concern of an imperial presidency. That is to say that the president can just has more power over the other branches, and the worse that gets, the less of a separation of powers that we have, the closer we veer into authoritarianism. Because I think that I think I agree with former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia that the real reason why our country is remains relatively free, at least compared to a good portion of the Western Hemisphere, is not because we have a constitution, but that we have a separation of powers. That no one branch of government has too much power over the other. But unlike, say, Libya, we're not like shooting at each other. We have a general fondness for the principles that we believe that this country was founded on.
So
I don't
what
mean to.
I think is
Yeah, I didn't
what
mean
I
to.
think is what I think is the problem in the United States is the breakdown of trust. I don't necessarily mean that you have trusted each other huge amounts in the earlier years, but you become, or at least huge swathes of your society have broken up into groups or cults or what should I say, echo chambers, where it's difficult to find any kind of disagreement where you're not perceiving each other as the enemy or the devil or anything worse than that. It's why I fear for your society as a whole. Is I have great difficulties seeing you patching up again after this, because in in the end, why are you a country? Why do you love or like America? What is America? What is fundamentally the United States of America? Is it just uh, uh, people living in the same country led by a president, or is it more than that? Is it a society of people living and breathing for the idea of being free and living in a fair system where you are able to strive for success? Or is it more like a system where every man for himself, and in order to come to the conclusion of every man for himself, I want to kick everyone down in order to reach my fullest potential? It's not just a society where you strive to do the best for yourself, but it's also important to kick those others down while you succeed.
So I guess the first thing I should ask is this a question for me specifically or Americans in general?
It's difficult. I think it's a question if you agree with that perception of the society, um, that you are too split to patch it up when everything changes again. If everything changes again.
let me just think for a second. Um, if we're to split up, I mean,
Yeah,
I do think that one thing that's nice about the United States is like I don't we generally don't believe in preventing people from leaving the country. So if you have people that have like if there are people that like sincerely dislike the lives that they have in the United States and they can afford to leave, then they're welcome to leave. And that's not to say the thing is that it's not like the government's gonna pay those people to leave. So people that can't afford to leave, they can't. But it's not like the government saying like, oh you're not planning on coming back. Well, we're gonna hold you hostage here, because there are countries out there that do that. I mean, not just communist ones, but I've heard that there's a bunch of countries in South America where they will like get on your case of, or I think even in some European countries, they're like, why are you leaving? How long are you going to be going for? And here in the United States, it's like, oh, you want out? Even if it's to move away, it's like fine, because like I've read comments posted by like black people who are Muslim, and they're like, yeah, I moved to Algeria. It's like, and for them it was great. So and like there are some ultra nationalists out there that get really weird about that. They'll call them traitors, etc. But most Americans would look at that and say like, hey, good for you, have fun. Um, as for the
yeah.
as for the
Sorry.
okay, I'll let you finish first and I'll continue.
No, no. Sorry, sorry,
All right.
sorry. It's yeah,
As for
just
disunity, I think that to a degree, I actually do think to an extent there was for quite a while there was a mutual disdain between urban and rural areas, because if you look at like election results by municipalities in like maps on Wikipedia, you will notice that the areas that are more urbanized, like cities and suburbs, tend to lean more towards to the Democratic Party, and the more rural areas tend to lean or be very heavily in favor of like the Republican Party. And you could argue like a big argument that the two biggest arguments progressives like to use is, oh, that's all just barren wasteland, hardly anybody lives out there, and they're all a bunch of uneducated stupid people. But I've seen and experienced quite a few stupid people on the left, like the radicalized guy that I mentioned before. He used to be a nice guy, but then like he goes to a university and they turn his brain into soup. Um, so it's like the progressives aren't always that much better, and the cities lean very heavily to the Democratic Party, which, as you Europeans know, is definitely not perfect. I guess like from the perspective of a lot of people, they're preferable to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is not like, they're not all monsters, but the monsters are the ones that make the headlines, and one of them is in the White House. But the rural areas have a lot of resentment towards urban areas for a number of different reasons. One example, and this is not like the whole deal, but one thing that annoys people living out in rural areas is like, you'll have people in the cities, they will say, eh, it's too crowded out here, so then they move out into rural areas. And I think these are sometimes, if not often, people with a lot of money. They move into rural areas, and then they'll be bitching that the farmers are using manure that smells bad. So then they will use their money and they will use their numbers when they come into these rural areas. They will like force the farmers to change what kind of manure they're using. They will, do all kinds of things to start pushing around the people that were already living in those rural areas. And then they turn the rural areas into urbanized areas. And I've seen this a lot in person. I don't have a study on hand on this, but I'm pretty sure if I were to look this up, I'd get a result that backs what I'm saying pretty quickly. That yeah, like people in urbanized areas, due to crime or crowding, they will get tired of living in like cities, and then they start moving out to less developed areas, and then they start, as a result of them, insisting on getting their way, they start developing the more rural areas, and then they turn them into suburbs and then eventually to cities. It's interesting that we have this urban sprawl in the United States, but Canada doesn't seem to have the same phenomenon, at least not to the same degree. They have cities that are overcrowded, but they have a lot of land that they just don't use. And I'm not even talking about the Canadian Shield, where construction is practically impossible. But as for the divide between the left and the right, I think we mentioned this in the last discussion that a big source of that is a big source of that is Russian propaganda. The Russian government has been very aggressively been fostering and fueling extremes on both sides of the political spectrum in the United States. They do puppeteering on the far left, like the woke side. They push like a lot of toxic woke stuff. But I think that the side that they've been really trying to get their tendrils in was actually the Republican right, the GOP right wing side. They've actually had operatives. I forget what her name is. I think her name was something Belina, who was a spy that went into the National Rifle Association, and she was doing operative work for the Russian government there. I mean, she's a Russian government agent, so yeah, obviously she supports the Russian government. But they've also the Russian government is also known for astroturfing, where they have an office in St. Petersburg that they have fake accounts that create articles. They create um, accounts to make it seem like pro-Russian politics are more popular than they probably actually are, or they will manipulate narratives. And the Chinese government does this too. I've seen them use a lot of bots on YouTube, but when the Chinese government does it, they tend to not be as subtle as the Russian government, because it's like sometimes like you'll be seeing bots and it's so obvious that they're bots because they didn't change the designation number to a fake username. They just straight up just use whatever the default name is, and it's they just overtly unironically advocate for the People's Republic of China's government, whereas like the Russian government spies tend to be more subtle about it. So I think that foreign interference is one thing that helped fuel a fire that was already going. You know, I know that divide was going on at least back in the Bush administration because I do remember it a little bit. I think it got amplified over the past couple of decades.
And what would it take to break through it, to find common ground again, in your opinion?
Now that's a good question because I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't actually know. uh, I guess if I guess Americans might have to just get smart. I guess it would probably. I don't know if there's anything that can be done on like a macro level, but on a micro level, like what I do, my part is people that I know personally who seem to be taken in by Russian propaganda or who start to go into extremes. I do try to talk to these people, and I try not to be too like on the nose and ham-fisted about how I go about it. But like, there's a close friend of mine. I hadn't seen him in a long time. He and I met in a restaurant a couple months ago, and he used to not like the Republican Party, but now he's a Trump supporter. And I got frustrated because he was just regurgitating Russian propaganda, voicing sympathy towards, because like Donald Trump called Zelensky a dictator and talk all kinds of shit about Ukraine and voice sympathy towards the Russian government. And this guy I knew was basically just regurgitating all that propaganda. The way I was able to work on him is I do remember at some point he mentioned that he really hated child molesters, and one thing that I was like, okay, so that's one like weak point. So I just meant so at some point later, like we were having a discussion, and I veered it into mentioning that the Russian military, when they went into a lot of areas in eastern Ukraine, they they bombed elementary schools and hospitals full of like innocent children. They go in, they rape the women and children, the Russian military. And I explained that the reason why they do this is because the Russian military has an incredibly toxically masculine culture leftists like to talk about toxic masculinity in the West, but you want to see where it's really bad is in the Russian military. Like Russia's always had a problem with that sort of thing, but the Russian military is that cranked all the way up to 11 because it's like they have a incredibly toxic hazing culture called Dedashina. I could be mispronouncing that, where people that have been in the military for a while have a tendency to abuse the new recruits in utterly horrendous ways. And the Russian military has always been known for committing horrendous war crimes, like back during World War II when the Red Army uh, swept into Europe after they defeated the Nazis in Eastern Europe. They went and committed mass rape. It was something that they did, and it's just this is not a new phenomenon for them. They've always been committing these horrific crimes against humanity. I kind of forgot I kind of forgot how I started on this. I'm sorry, but
No, it's
oh yeah,
okay.
oh yeah. We were talking about like how do we fix this problem of political division in the United States? I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't really know the answer because it's really hard. You see, the Republican Party, I was actually in it. I could tell you that they don't really treat it like, oh, you could have different political views and it's a spectrum that varies. They look at the Republican Party as a business. And if you're a member of that party and your politics differ slightly, they look at that as they would look at that in the same light as somebody working at McDonald's going out on their lunch break and bringing back like Burger King or Wendy's and eating it inside the restaurant. Like that's obviously a conflict of interests. But the thing is that these political parties. It's not just the Republican Party. I know people that were in the Democratic Party and they've had basically the same experience. These political parties in the United States, they treat political differences in the same way that businesses treat like uh, conflicts of interest regarding employees and customers.
Yeah, that is a problem. But it is people are able to break through it, but they they need to be really really good candidates to do that,
Well, here's a
and
I'm sorry.
and they also need to be locally based. It's not okay to have a congressman or woman from a neighboring state just moving to the state in order to represent it in an election. It's bad business. It's really bad for election.
Oh yeah,
You
that
you
happens a
need
lot.
ground level people who are able to talk with and not about their constituents.
Yeah, I think that does happen a lot. I mean, I can understand people move from one state for another to another for various reasons, but yeah.
It's
Um,
it's okay. It's okay to move for a state, but it's not okay to move. I would even say districts just in order to get a position. You have to find people who could have that position, who could fight for their constituents in the seats that are not able to it.
I think that yeah, and I think that that's something that's a that would also be a difference in the amount of money a person has because like a wealthier person can own like more than one home and it's like oh I want to move to this other district, then they just make their official residence in this other home that they own. But a poor person who can only afford like one place, it would be very difficult for them to attempt the same thing. And you have politicians that aren't wealthy, but they're usually like local politicians who don't have the same amount of money as like your career politicians and more powerful positions in society.
It it went wrong when money just became okay in politics, when huge interest groups were able to buy congressmen
Yeah.
and senators and the president.
Yeah, I probably don't need to tell you how that's a problem. Like how years ago there was a direct selling caucus um, that I don't know if it was the caucus or if it was a special interest group by multi-level marketing companies that bought out a bunch of Congress people to prevent them from watching the screening of a documentary about the problem about the menace that multi-level marketing companies are to society and how they're like pyramid schemes. So like I'm pretty sure you know how much of a problem that is in our country. I mean, like corruption problems are are an issue all across the Western Hemisphere. I would I do I don't know how well Canada has a handle on it, but I've talked to people who say that Canadian corporations mistreat their employees because to have a tendency to mistreat their employees and price gouge because the Canadian government overtly favors them in order to maintain their national as an effort to maintain their national sovereignty. And this was going on before Trump's threats to invade them.
Yeah.
I was
so
yeah.
um, so uh, where do we take it from here? It's difficult that you really can't do anything about the special interest groups because it's become a part of free speech in society. And as long as it's free speech to buy politicians, well, then then where will you take it?
I do
Because
think
you could always have billionaires who are able to buy up uh, thoughts, and that's
I
a
think
bad big statement.
I'm sorry. I think
Yeah, it's okay.
I think when it comes to special interest groups, like yes, they like lobbying is protected speech, and it's really hard to do something about that. And the founding fathers try to address the issue of lobbying groups by having like a lot of them, so that way like you wouldn't have a few that were too powerful to the point where they had a monopoly. Although if you ask me, they should have done the same thing with political parties, so that way we wouldn't have a two-party system because that's, in my opinion, is very toxic and probably in the opinions of many other people. As for lobbying groups, I think that ideally we would make it so that you can't engage in what's essentially legal bribery, but the problem is that the people who are in the power seat are the people that would need to be held accountable, so that ain't going to happen anytime soon. If people were like protesting and rebelling the way they are in Los Angeles right now, if they did that over that kind of stuff, it might end overnight. Or I don't know. Like the government would take it more seriously, but people fervently defend their illegal immigrant friends. They fervently get fired up anytime a police officer shoots a black guy. But a lot of other problems in the United States, I guess they just don't care about it as much. Because I really hate to say this, but it seems like violence is how you. This might get me in trouble, but it seems like violence is how you get things done in this country, or the threat of it. Because like I don't know if I said this last discussion, but when there was a bunch of healthcare, not healthcare companies, but health insurance
It's
companies.
talked about last time. It's about the killer, the healthcare killer you're talking about. That he Luigi.
Yeah, Luigi
He was
Mangione.
man, managed to keep the healthcare services
Well,
from doing the harm that they were doing.
the fact that this one health insurance company was about to roll out a plan to deny people with pre-existing conditions or special needs coverage, and that the only thing that got them to back off of it was Luigi Mangione assassinating the CEO of the health insurance company that had more denial claim denials than any other health insurance company in the entire country, all because like the guy who got assassinated created an algorithm specifically to deny people coverage. The fact that it took that assassination in order to get that other health insurance company in line, what that kind of proves, it's like if you want results, you gotta start assassinating people. And I'm not telling anyone to do that, obviously, but that's the message that's being sent. And the people that are doing the rioting and shit, they point to that and say, "See, it gets results." And a lot of people in the country, in this country, they our textbooks in schools, shower praise on Martin Luther King for, you know, being this like civil rights activist, but one thing that they don't really teach us in school is when he said in an interview that violence, like this kind of violence, is the language of the unheard. People who the government institutions, the people that society just don't take seriously, like when they get violent, then society takes them seriously. And that one message that Martin Luther King was saying is like, hey, I'm not going to do this kind of violence, but these other people who have the same end goals as I do, they want to burn this country down. Do you want to negotiate with me, or do you want to attempt to negotiate with these people who want to uh, hang you or put you in the guillotine, so to speak? And
Well, it was the message of Malcolm X.
so I'm sorry. What's that?
Malcolm X.
No.
That was his message was that you shouldn't just be uh, peaceful protesting because you're not getting anything done by doing that. You have to be radical.
Well, it's unfortunate, but the only two methods that seem to get positive change is if there are people that are on the inside. If you have insiders, push for change for the better. Like slavery in the United States was abolished because there was the Northerners, white male politicians who were against slavery, who legislated the end of slavery against people on the basis of their race. Because we still do have slavery. The 13th Amendment to our Constitution allows for slavery as long as it was punishment for a crime or paying back a debt to society. But it's illegal to enslave people because of their immutable characteristics. And the thing that ended the latter kind of slavery was Abraham Lincoln becoming president. The Deep South rebelling against the country and creating a rogue state that where their cause for existing was to keep slavery. It took the Union backhanding the Confederacy and forcibly ending slavery. I mean, either way, it seems like violence is how we actually make the radical changes in this country. One is by people within the government using force to end it, because the people that they're trying to deal with don't want to give up the status quo. Or you have rioters or rebels, etc., scaring the government into compliance. And because like this was a similar, like people didn't talking about bullying seriously until there were a couple school shootings that were motivated by it. People didn't really seem to care about Muslims more. People weren't as skittish about respecting Muslims as much until there were some terrorist attacks. Based on everything that I've seen, it's like, I hate to say it, but it's we're a bunch of fucking wild animals, man.
Yeah. Just two things. I would say you still have some kind of slavery in the United States, and it's prison labor.
Oh yeah.
It's state mandated or federally mandated uh, slavery, where you are actually hurting the working people of America by treating other Americans like they are not humans,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's state mandated, and people in the states like it because they don't give a shit about the people. I think I read that California had it on the ballots last time, and well, they did not remove the ability to use slave labor in prison. So it must be something you like as a society, but that's a sad thing. Um, what does it say about your society that in order to make great changes, it seems that you have to use violence?
yeah. I mean,
That's
I didn't mean to interrupt if you were continuing.
no, it was the question.
I mean, I don't think you and I specifically are in disagreement about this. The problem is that like it's not just the powers that be, but like the general attitude with a lot of Americans, especially this is more the case with boomers, like older people, generally people between the ages of like 50 and 70. They're like, well, if you're in prison or if you're in jail, then you probably did something to deserve being enslaved. And of course, the problem is it's like from the government's perspective and the perspective of corporations that benefit from slave labor, because sometimes the government or the private prisons, they will have their slave labor being done in contracts with various corporations that operate in the United States. And these corporations are like, why would we pay living wages to law abiding American citizens when we can just like force inmates to do that work either for a tiny amount of money to pay for their food and whatever else, or they might just, or sometimes they just force them to do it for free. And this is, I think that this is more of a problem in the deep south because I see a lot of, I've seen, I mean, it was a John Oliver video that I found found these video clips of, you know, from documentaries and from statements by the police departments or the of the wardens of some of these prisons. Like there was one, I think he was, I don't know if he was a warden or some official, some public official in either Alabama or Louisiana. So this is one of the most backward states in the United States. He's like the prisoners who are like really bad, like that are really bad people, need to be punished. Like some of the people that were enslaving are really bad people, and he said, but some of them are really good people, but we don't want to let them go because they do good work. They work really hard, and we've made ourselves dependent on their slave labor. And it's like, why pay law-abiding citizens a living wage when they can just exploit people that basically have no rights and no one's sympathetic, like hardly anybody sympathetic to them in society. And here's the thing, even I'm not super proud of the fact that I voted for Kamala Harris beyond the fact that it's not Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, I saw so many red flags with him being a bad president, but who's gonna probably wreck up the country and our foreign politics particularly. But Kamala Harris, I was not super thrilled about voting for her for president because she was trying to protect, like she was I think she was either a federal prosecutor or attorney general in the state of California. She was doing what she could to protect slave labor in prisons, like prison labor, because it was profitable. So, like, what does it say about us as a society? I'm gonna. This is gonna sound like somewhat of a cop out, but I think that some of this is descendant of European colonialism, because the religious fundamentalism, the tough on crime attitude, like if you go back, let's say, yeah, 400 years, like Europe, like we had our Salem witch trials, we had our witch hunts. At least like when we executed people for being witches, we drowned them or hung them. In Europe,
We burned them,
particularly in Britain, like they were burning people alive, which is a very inhumane way to kill someone. Because
especially in Denmark.
oh really
We,
they did that in
we
Denmark
killed
too?
thousands. We killed thousands. Burned them. It was persecution from directly from the king. He believed in black magic and believed in witches. So yeah, they died. It was sad.
Yeah, like I'm not
It's
I'm
horrible. It's horrible.
like
But
yeah.
that was history. That's how it was. Religious fundamentalism was really a thing.
Like I'm not saying this stuff to like dunk on you or to make you feel bad, but and I don't mean this to sound like an excuse, but we got to consider the fact that colonialism, the societies that were colonized, basically like were the Enlightenment that took place in Europe, where you got to the point where you are now, that did not reach the colonies. So, and it's not just the United States. It's not just the countries in South America or Mexico. It's not just like it's also like the African countries. I think a lot of Southeast Asian countries seem to have recovered to a degree, but like like religious fundamentalism, like back in the 1600s, Europe was not seen as a beacon of. Well, I don't know if they were seen as a beacon of progressivism, but from the Middle Ages to the early modern era, there was a lot of like Christian like fundamentalism. There was a lot of like there's theocracy. Roman Catholicism was the state religion of France. The Church of England, Anglicanism, was the state religion of England, or and later the UK. Like the state religions that were strongly enforced in Europe was the norm. People were very superstitious. This this was introduced to the places that would become the colonies and later would become independent countries. But it's like all these countries didn't really shake off the religious fundamentalism because what we're dealing with is a set of values that were developed in the society. Because it's like in Europe back in the Middle Ages, like for various different crimes or for witchcraft, etc. They didn't focus on rehabilitating criminals. They tortured people. They executed people. High treason was treated with drawing and quartering and other forms of torture that I would rather not discuss. They had the breaking wheel. They you know did they did like execution methods where it's like like there was a video on YouTube that showed like just how bad it was, and I was like I had to stop watching because it's just like so disgusting. Now here in the United States, we generally didn't like go anywhere near as far into like execution methods that were anywhere near as just like you'd have to be a sadist to perform some of this stuff. We we liked we used hanging. We did drownings in the case of like the witches. Um, we would do lethal injection or firing squad, which is a lot more. It's a lot less inhumane than putting somebody on like taking somebody, strapping them down, and then using like a sawmill to like slowly saw them to death, which was something that I remember reading in a documentary about execution and torture methods they used in the Bastille before the French Revolution. And the religious fundamentalism, like that was introduced by the European colonial powers, and the undoing of that was not introduced across the oceans because it was somewhat insulated in Europe. Because like it's not just us. Uh, African countries, they are super aggressively Christian. Christianity didn't get there on its own. It was introduced by the European countries. And it's really hard to uproot that when it's like these people in South America, in the United States, in a lot of these African countries that used to be colonies are like they're like Christian fundamentalism has a very strong hold, but it's hard to uproot it when it's like these people don't want to. A lot of these people just don't want to let it go. Now, in the parts of the United States that I live in, like being a being a like being a true believer kind of like religious person is not as big of a thing as it is in like the southeastern part of the United States where it's extremely strong. But there is still like an element of say prudishness. Like if you in movies we take sex a lot more seriously than violence. I like Christian like Christian fundamentalists and people that are very religious would take both seriously, but as a general rule in our society, we're generally a lot more squeamish about explicit sex in movies. Like we don't really like tolerate it. We have laws in the books about it, especially when it comes to exposing minors to that kind of stuff. Now that doesn't stop people from technically breaking the law, but we're talking about like legal systems. And then I remember being surprised to see just how relaxed people in European countries were about it. Um, but it's a different set of values. It's a different society, a different legal system, and it's how to uproot that. It's very difficult. I guess one way you could slowly work on people is to have like maybe Europeans just interact with not just Americans, like people in the United States, but people in the Western Hemisphere in general, minus Canada. Canada seems to be pretty progressive about that stuff. But the rest of the entire Western Hemisphere, so it's not just the United States, but it's all these Spanish speaking countries too. And those Spanish speaking countries are far more religious than the United States is by comparison. Like, you would have to interact with these people, and there's no guarantee that you'll succeed because it's like if these are grown adults, they're like grown adults that are really religious, it's really hard to get through to them because they've grown an emotional attachment to this stuff, and in some cases they might actually be psychotic. Um, but like you would have to change like what people are being taught in schools, and I just don't see that changing anytime soon. And not just in the United States, it's a lot of these Spanish speaking countries that were former colonies of Spain, which had the Spanish Inquisition, and a lot of these African countries too, where they are far more religious than the Western Hemisphere, if you ask me.
And that's also when you're talking about religious, you are most likely talking about Catholicism
Well,
or some of the other kinds of
Christianity.
Christianity where you have uh, some kind of structure
It's not just
where
it's not
yeah,
just
sorry.
yeah, I'm sorry. It's not just Roman Catholicism. Like Roman Catholicism was like the state religion in, well, it was the state religion in a lot of European countries before the Reformation, and then you got your Protestant denominations. Because here's the thing: even though like the Northeast and I think the West Coast, and maybe even like the northern part of the Midwest in the United States, Roman Catholicism is a lot more commonplace there. The parts of the United States that are more religious fundamentalist are Protestants in the southeastern part of the country. Like those Protestants are usually either non-denominational, like self-described non-denominational. They're Baptists. They're usually some variety of Protestant. They're not Catholic. In the Spanish-speaking world, the opposite is the case. Typically, they are Roman Catholics. Same deal with a lot of African countries, but there is an organization called GAFCON, which is a very right wing Anglican organization because they broke off from the Church of England because they saw the Church of England as being too progressive and liberal. So then they created their own, which is the Africans created their own. Uh, they created their own Anglican denomination, which is much more right wing. I think that sub-Saharan Africans tend to be far more right wing when it comes to Christianity or just in general. Not all of them, but a lot of them are just very, very they call themselves traditionalist conservative, but I'm not sure if that's the best term to use. And it's not just Christianity. This does exist to a far smaller level in Judaism. This exists. We know that in Islam there's like no liberal version of it, or if there is, it's definitely not the one that takes power in a lot of these Arab countries or the Muslim world in general, which also includes Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Religion in Northern Europe is uh, only Lutheranism or parts of it. It's it's more like the idea of Christianity, the message of Christianity, instead of um, following hard rules. It's more about striving to do your best, work hard, and be an ethical human being. When I look at religion in the US, I think there is, in parts, the religious rights are, are not really following what I would perceive as the word of Christ or the word of the Bible. It's so different from the message of what I perceive is the message of the Bible in being good to your neighbor and just being kind and strive for a better future until the end of days.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I do remember is like as much as I hated the Westboro Baptist Church, which you've probably heard of, um, it was kind of funny watching them be a headache for other people in the religious right, because the religious right is trying to like, I mean, it is the anti-homosexuality stuff is it's really hard to um, have a strong argument against it because the Bible, like if you actually read the Bible, it's there's a lot in there that's very anti-gay, and it's not like it wasn't like oh under Mosaic law back in the Old Testament, it was verboten, but it was expanded upon later on in the New Testament, and like Jesus Christ Himself personally appointed Peter to be what would later become the Pope, the very first one. And Peter, in no uncertain terms, condemned homosexuality. I am not a homophobe. This is in the Bible. So it's just like the reason I'm not. I mean, there's a number of reasons why I'm not really a Christian, but like the biggest reason is I'm an agnostic. I just don't really see the evidence for any particular monotheistic religion. Like I don't see any evidence that really gives one the leg up on the other. Like I don't think any of them gave the silver bullet to the other ones. Because like let's say there is a deity. Let's say all this is like all of it's true. It's like okay, which monotheistic religion, which religion is correct? Because it's like they're all saying that they are the one true religion, and then they've got a bunch of bazillion denominations. Who's right? Uh, but the thing is, I'm sorry for going off topic. The Christians in the United States, they're kind of all over the place. You got the religious right, which I've got a feeling that a lot of it is like I think that you got homophobes that use you have homophobes and other kinds of sketchy people that use Christianity as a cudgel to justify what they're doing in the same way that back in the Middle Ages, like you had monarchs say that they had a divine right to rule. It's debatable as to how religious those monarchs were when you had, like, say, Louis the 15th and maybe to a lesser extent Louis the 14th saying, like, oh, I've got the divine right to rule, but they're fornicating like crazy. It's like, I'm not sure if Jesus would approve of this.
No, but now you're talking about homosexuality.
Well, I don't
I
mean.
would say it's up for interpretation. you could uh, use all your time on the Old Testament about the homosexuality, homosexuals, and the angels, and so on. I think it was it's in the interpretation of the Bible that we at here in Western Europe is more and it's in an interpretation on love thy neighbor than it's about the hateful things, because in the end it is not for people to judge, it is for God the Almighty. But I'm, if I had to put words on my religiosity, my religion, I am I'm perhaps agnostic as well, but I would define myself as a Christian. I'm a doubter, but um, I am not going to say it's not real. I'm going to say I believe in the message of being kind, of love, of doing good, and you could take that from many religions. But I think that is the message. Should, if you are a decent human being, that is what you should take from religion. And you could use religion as an opportunity to uh, find out more about yourself, because you can use it as self-reflection. But you don't need a religion. To be agnostic is great as well. I'm not saying that Christ and God existed. I cannot. I in it's a fight between my logic logical part, the logical parts of me, and the more spiritual parts of me. So yeah.
I do. I mean, I don't think that Christianity is perfect. The fact that in medieval Europe you had all these horrible things happen, not just the arrested and the accused, but you had Louis. I think it was it Louis the Ninth or Louis the 12th. I think it was Louis the Ninth being canonized as a saint for committing genocide against Jews in France when there was there was a Jewish rabbi who converted to Roman Catholicism who brought it to the attention of the Catholic authorities in France that it turned out that um, because the Roman Catholic Church thought that the that Judaism ended at the Old Testament, but apparently the Jews had Judaism has like a continuation after that, and there was stuff in there that the that this ex rabbi turned almost like I guess an inquisitor that he was bringing to the attention of the Roman Catholic Church. And Louis the Ninth of France back in the Middle Ages, sometime in the 1200s, I believe is when it was. He summoned, basically subpoenaed a bunch of Jewish rabbis throughout the country to explain to have a debate to debate him on Judaism and Catholicism. And that went on for a while. This was I think it was called the Dissentation of Paris or something. And when Louis the Ninth couldn't convince these rabbis to convert to Christianity, he got frustrated and then ordered the burning of a bunch of Talmuds and Torahs, and he basically forced Jews to convert to Christianity against their will. And you could argue that these aren't like true Christians. They're doing this most likely for political and reasons and power, but I don't think that Christianity is perfect enough to be an effective religion for uh, enforcing morality. Enforcing morality is kind of difficult though if there's not really like a strong social cohesion for it. Because here's the thing is we were talking last discussion we were talking about, you were saying that it was heinous to kill people either in executions or for somebody to murder another person. But my question to you is how do you quantitatively value somebody's life?
It is not for me to do that.
So who gets
In
so
it's yeah. Sorry.
but who gets to decide that and what makes their opinion more valuable?
It's you. I would say it's two parts. If you had use a religious point of view, it's for God to decide. It's for Saint Peter to decide if you've been bad or you've been good.
But what if I don't
In a law-based society, we have said we're not going to decide ourselves whether a person is good or bad. We have decided that we are a country of laws, and we are going to treat them through the laws, the judiciary system.
well, us countries in the Western Hemisphere, we do have laws too, but the general attitude of every country that's south of the Canadian border is like we generally value human life unless that human life does something to demonstrate that it's not really worth keeping around. Because I mean, in the United States, yes, we do have a large prison population. I wouldn't be surprised if China does too, and that they're lying about the number of people that they've got in their prisons, the way they're lying about all the genocides they're committing. But that's a discussion for another time. But the thing is, it's like you're gonna have a very hard sell trying to convince people in the Western Hemisphere, south of Canada, that human life that commits heinous acts or acts that those like us in the Western Hemisphere dislike, it's a very hard sell for you to convince to us that their lives are worth keeping around because like you know, barring the prison population, the United States has a massive population. We're one of the most populated countries on planet Earth. Human life is so abundant here. It's like if somebody does something that that gets the general consensus of people in the country to consider their lives not valuable, like killing them isn't that big of a blow to society because we have so much human life. They're easily replaceable. Their lives are about as valuable. The lives of people who do things that we dislike are about as valuable as toilet paper, especially used toilet paper. And there's so many people trying to get into this country. People are very easily replaceable in the United States. But then you look at like countries south of our border, they're not that much different from us in that regard. I mean, they speak a different language. A lot of them look differently from us, but they might actually, if anything, they go further than us when it comes to punishment and whatnot. They do execute people. There's killings and such. They're more believers in retribution, and that's partially, I think, I think that that's partially downstream of the variety of Christianity the Spanish taught them. And whereas Spain largely went atheist, their colonies are somewhat stuck in time, are trapped in time in that way. But I don't want to go too off topic. But the thing is, it's like, how do you quantitatively say like human life is valuable? Some people that are progressive will say, oh well, there's a social contract. It's like, okay, well, who signed that contract? Because those of you in Europe, you don't have the same values as your former colonies.
So then, I would say all life is valuable, and it is not for us. And that might be my Christianity, my deep Christianity. As a human being, I don't believe that it is for me to decide or for us as a society to decide if a man gets to live or die.
I have a question then.
That, yeah,
Do you believe that disobedient male children, do you believe that fathers should have their disobedient male sons put to death?
no, I don't, because that's not the part that's not the parts of the Bible that I believe in. I believe in the New Testament about treating people with dignity and being all life is important. I don't believe that Christianity, and that again, it's a highly focused part of Christianity. I'm a part of. It's not a door religion. It's a religion of empathy and about love and about treating your neighbor with respect and love. And in the end, it is not my decision if people get to live or die, but I will, of course, I will. If I see a mass murderer or a pedophile or something like that, I will of course say all kinds of horrendous things, and I would want them dead and so on. But I'm glad I'm not being the judge because I don't want to be that. I don't want a society to be judging others, especially because we've seen again and again that the state is able to make mistakes regarding executions. So an innocent life being taken by the state is much worse than killing than not killing perhaps a million bad guys.
Okay. The thing is if what you were saying is that you believe that all human life is inherently valuable and people shouldn't be killing each other under any circumstances, then it's just like, oh, then I would say, okay, that's good enough of an answer. But there are people that try to say that Christianity says or values one thing or another, and then it's like if you actually read the Bible, it's like, well, actually, because I remember back in the '90s, well, a couple of years ago, after Megan Phelps Roper left the Westboro Baptist Church, she was in a discussion. This YouTube video doesn't exist anymore. She was telling the interviewer like how they got started doing their picketing, that they did a picket not as a church but as a family, as a community. They were picketing at Gage Park when after a somebody behind a bush tried luring Fred Phelps' grandson behind a bush. So they were going out picketing against it, saying like, watch your children. There's pedophiles on Gage Park, etc. And they got like vicious counter protesters saying like God's about love. God, wants you to love everybody. They free love and stuff like that. And um Megan Phelps Roper, like her parents, her grandfather, were looking through the Bible. It's like, well, actually no, it doesn't say that. It says this instead. And because if you're not getting your authority from the Bible, where do you get it from? Because in the Roman Catholic Church, the main source of authority is the Pope, and it's almost like I don't want to call it a theocratic dictatorship, but it's like if he is the Roman Catholic version of the like Jewish high priest of Israel, where they have direct communication with God, and he gets to tell us what God's will is. He's basically like the mouthpiece of God. Then, as like a Protestant would get their source of information from the Bible. And there was a line in there somewhere where Jesus explicitly said, like, you can't just pick and choose what what God's commandments you want to follow, you do and don't want to do. If you're going to be a Christian, To disagree with part of my message is to disagree with all of it. And I'm not saying that Christianity is actually like, you know, is actually like that the people in the Christian right have got it right. They're not. They're the kind of people Jesus Christ would have got out a whip and started whipping, like that incident in a Jewish temple where you had all these Pharisees uh, being blatant hypocrites. I might be getting the wrong part of the Bible. I'd have to look into that more deeply to have a specific source, but Jesus did say to disagree with part of his commands and part of God's commands is to disagree with all of it. This is the reason why so many religious fundamentalists a lot of Christian fundamentalists who are really cringy, this is the reason why they say in all this stuff is because they've got like the Bible memorized and they could back up what they're saying. So this is one of the reasons. I mean, it's not for me. It's more about belief. Like this has got to be like you got to have a convincing argument to me to tell me that this stuff is real. And so I'm motivated more by cold logic than like and of like I guess I do have my feelings in it a little bit. But the reason why I agreed with you and having like in on the rehabilitation stuff in last discussion is I think that if we as a general rule attempted to have a system that rehabilitated people who commit crimes that it would have better outcomes than the system that we have right now, which is more focused towards exploitation. You do have like North Korea may be an extreme example, but North Korea is really focused on punishment. We're gonna punish you. A lot of East Asian countries are like that. They like the punishment. They like they're more focused on retribution. In the United States, the general problem that we have is there's a lot of corruption and exploitation. It's it's and then there's also this attitude of well, the thing that you didn't do is that big of a deal, so instead of trying to rehabilitate you, we're just going to lock you up for a little bit, and then we're just going to release you out into the public so you can go commit more crimes. Unless if we consider it to be more serious, then we'll lock you up for a longer period of time. I do think that that is a dysfunctional system, but the problem is the people with the power to do something about it don't give a fuck. Um, so like back on to the point when it comes to religion, it's like if you're not using religion to quantitatively value human life, what is it like? What is that value based in? Because if I don't believe in your religion, how are you going to convince me that human life that I don't approve of continuing to exist? How are you going to convince me or any other person in the Western Hemisphere that that human life is valuable?
Well, I'm not going to. It is for you to decide. It's for your countries to decide what values you adhere to. My country is based on the belief of that part of Christianity, or that part of Lutheranism. It's my belief is based on a Danish thinker called Grundtvig. It was he believed in the messages of the Bible. It was we shouldn't learn the Bible from one end to the other and be able to repeat it. You had to understand the message of the Bible, the message of love, message of freedom, and he also meant that he also thought that you were a human first and a Christian after that. You were not living a life as a Christian, but as only a Christian person. You are a person, and then you were a Christian, and you had the values from Christianity to live life from there on. But it's a part your journey as human until you die is to be happy to use your life as an education, not only about um, schools, but a part of being a part of society, a part of humanity, and that's where my religious thoughts are. It is for other societies to decide where their beliefs are. I don't agree with them, and I wouldn't want to live in a society where those values weren't the same as mine. So I wouldn't move to the US because it's not the same values you have as my society has.
if you dislike it in the United States, just wait till you see Mexico and Brazil.
Yeah, I understand. I understand, and Southern America and Africa and so on. It is for them to decide. I'm not going to say that they are wrong. They will decide that they are, in my opinion, free persons, and they will decide where that society goes. I will disagree with them. I will find it odd, but again, we are different societies, and let people believe in what they want to and have the values that they want to, and then we can have a discussion based on that.
Yeah, I think that it's a difference in values, and when you take the religion away, when people in general don't believe in these religions, then it becomes a question of like, well, what do you want? And here's the thing: even when everybody was religious and were true believers, it's like it seems like this is just I guess a shift, a reinterpretation of the Bible, because back in the Middle Ages, it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, in the early modern period at least, it was actually heresy to have not read the Bible. So back in the Middle Ages, like everybody was super religious, they were all Christian, or
You couldn't read the Bible. You couldn't read the Bible. That's part of why Luther was successful, because he rewrote the Bible into German for people to understand it. Most people didn't understand the Bible. It was for priests in the church who most often uh, didn't understand the Bible either. They just taught different things because they didn't understand Latin. When you had a small town in Western Jutland on Eastern Jutland, it's part of Denmark.
mm-hmm.
Uh, they wouldn't understand the word of Christ. They would have some parts of it they understood, but not everyone understood Latin. So it was different kinds of religion, and they were preaching in Latin, and their congregations did not understand it. It was more like a congregation of being together, and they were fearful. It was the fear of God and um, the fear of what could happen to them if they didn't attend.
I do think, well, if I'm maybe maybe I haven't done enough reading on this, because obviously you know your history as far as Denmark, and maybe to an extent Europe back in those times, is because like the nit like the specifics, like what you're talking about, I'm not as knowledgeable on exactly what happened over there. Um, I what I had read is that the Roman Catholic Church, when it was the state religion in almost every single one of those countries, that they did like build schools and they taught people all the stuff that they were teaching them, what was in the Bible, I guess maybe. But I do remember reading somewhere that there was a time where it was apparently that they didn't want people reading it because they wanted to be the sole interpreters, and that changed depending on who was the Pope and what kind of people were in the Vatican at the time. But
So Christianity in Denmark, we were we had another religion before that, Thor and Odin and so on. It was a pagan religion, but um, we changed religion because because the king wanted to have more centralized power, and religion was able to do that. We have stories on how it happens. That's not the power play, but the stories we have is that he was convinced by a preacher who was able to hold a rod of iron which had been put into the fire, and he wasn't hurt, and that's how the king was able to say, "Hey, we had uh, to adhere to Christianity because this man is able to touch a fiery steel, and he hasn't been hurt at all." But the real reason for our change in religion was that they wanted a centralized religion, and because of power struggles from southern parts of our borders to Germany, or what was the the Holy Roman Empire.
Holy Roman Empire, yeah. I mean, it was basically Germany, but they were calling themselves the Holy Roman Empire, even
And
though it
France.
it wasn't really any of those things. It wasn't holy. There was a French person who said it was not holy. It was definitely not Roman, and it wasn't even an empire. It was basically just a collection of different German countries.
It is true. It's true. But they also had, uh, at least for periods, they had a pope which was located in France. So it's really when we talk about religion in Europe, especially when you're talking about history, it's very muddy, very murky. You you have very corrupt figures of the Roman papacy, and that was also one of the reasons why Luther broke with the
95
Roman
Theses.
parts of. Sorry.
When Luther nailed his 95 Theses on that one chapel
Yeah,
door.
yeah, but it wasn't a start. It wasn't a break with the church. Was he tried to put out ideas without breaking with the church as such, but he was thrown out and yeah, made to flee.
I'm not denying that. Like I know that uh like Martin Luther just wanted to reform the Roman Catholic Church, and then Pope Leo X excommunicated him because he didn't like some of the bullet points on those theses. He excommunicated him, and then sent he chased him into hiding. Like he had like assassins looking for him, or maybe they were inquisitors trying to like hunt him down and have him assassinated or made an example of.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Let's say 45 minutes more, and then we'll wrap it up. So
whatever's best for you.
yeah, okay. What would you like to continue about? What subject would you like to continue with? Uh, Religion still, or
I think like with religion, well, I mean, I just want to touch. I just want to do some touch up on this religion stuff, and then
yeah,
uh, move on to something that I wanted to address last discussion, and I forgot about it. And it was only after I was editing it, I was like, oh, I wish I said this since at some point. So the thing about religion and value and values and all this stuff, it is kind of like the emotionally compromised argument is kind of like the whole thing, because it's like with these Abrahamic religions, there's really no way they can prove that they're real, because like in the Bible, it's like, oh, if you were to look upon the face of God, you die. Like if you see the evidence that God is real, it kills you. So it's like, okay, well, how are we supposed to believe that any of this stuff happened if we're not allowed to see the evidence? And the response is basically like, just trust me, bro. Because like, if you were an atheist in Europe back in the Middle Ages, or if you were an atheist in like the American colonies for a good portion of the existence, well, before the official founding of the United States, it's like you were heavily sanctioned in society. There's no way to really, there's no real solid way to prove that Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, like the stuff that happened in their holy books, was real. So they had to rely on coercion and force in order to get their way. So the thing is, it's like at which point it's like, well, if you can't convince somebody that one of any of these religions that whichever your one true religion is, if you can't convince people that it's real and you don't have the force to force them into compliance, then it becomes an issue of like, okay, well, they have their values which are different from yours, but there's no quantitative way you can really like say one thing is immoral or something else is immoral. It becomes an issue of like vibes and feelings, and that's kind of the whole issue with this matter, with these matters of like, for example, like the value of human life. There are a lot of people that don't value human life at all. There are people that think that all human life is valuable, and then there are people that would say human life is valuable until it does something to lower its own value. And there's a lot of variation there, and not all these people that would believe these things are atheists. Some of them uh, at least claim to be religious. I mean, the Christian right in the United States likes the death penalty, and they will point to various things in the Bible that justify its usage, and that may be in conflict with what Jesus later on said. But the thing is, it's like when it comes to atheists, like if you're dealing with an agnostic person like me, how do you? It's like there's no way. There's just no way to like convince me that something is objectively immoral if it's not based in anything, but like feels. Now the thing that I did concede on is having, when it comes to like prison, for example, and this is me veering into the next thing that I wanted to get into. The I can understand having a prison system that generally focuses on rehabilitating people at a organized level, at a generalized level, that would produce better outcomes in stopping recidivism than having whatever system that we have now, which, if anything, is partially based in retribution, but also more, I think, is which is more sinister, focused on financial exploitation. And in other countries, that are maybe not as wealthy as we are, they have they focus more on retribution. But like I said before, just because our government's got a lot of money, doesn't really decide what the values are. Just take a look at the Philippines, for example. Now, I don't remember exactly which first lady this was, but there was a first lady who was like the wife of the president, and they were fabulously wealthy. This woman had like had a massive collection of hundreds and hundreds of shoes by itself, and the rest of the country was living in poverty. Just because the rulers are wealthy doesn't really mean anything. Like, if the people are not in favor of having social services or having a prison system that generally focuses on rehabilitation, doesn't mean anything. It doesn't necessarily correlate. Now, the thing that I wanted to address last discussion is, we were talking about that thief guy we were talking about last discussion. Let's say like when the next time he gets himself thrown in jail, there is an attempt to rehabilitate him. Do you think that he is entitled to having victims to steal from before they finish rehabilitating him?
I would need need you to clarify.
So the thing that typically gets himself in trouble, aside from beating people up, is stealing from people. And let's say like the next time he gets caught, he gets arrested, he goes to jail again. But instead of just throwing him in like a lion's den with a bunch of other people of the same caliber, there is an attempt to like rehabilitate them so that way they're not. Let's say we had like a system that tried to rehabilitate them so that way they don't commit these kinds of crimes again. And they're not. Do you believe? And this may be a very obvious one, but I just want an answer to this anyway. Do you believe that they should have access to people to steal from or harm in some way before the rehabilitation is concluded and before that they've been changed?
So just to be certain, what you're asking me for is if I believe that they should get out in society before they have finished their sentences, or
Well, maybe
because
not even.
in jail it might be difficult to uh, steal.
Well, I mean, they can steal from each other because inmates do steal from one another. Because it's not like we throw them in a box and they're all by themselves. They are like they're not. It's because that would be solitary confinement. Typically, what happens is, it's like what prison and jail is. It's like it's a series of large rooms, and those rooms have like dorms in them, and they're like the inmates are all bunking with each other. Like they have these bunk beds. They're very uncomfortable from what I've seen, but these bunk beds are all next to each other, and so they're all living with each other. So it's very easy for people to steal from each other. So if you're trying to rehabilitate them, so that way they don't steal specifically, for example, do you think that they should be allowed to have access to victims to steal from, or do you think that part of the rehabilitation is that there is a way to like I wouldn't know how you would actually fix somebody like that, someone like a remorseless hardened criminal.
Some
Um,
people you won't be able to rehabilitate,
so do you,
but you are. Sorry.
so I'm trying to think of a way for me to word this in a way that it's like concise and easy to understand. But like in the process of trying to rehabilitate somebody, do you think that they should have access to victims to steal from, whether they're in or out of prison?
Access to people to steal from. So are you asking me whether they should be able to be with other inmates?
No.
Because
Do you? Well, I
no,
mean that's part of it. Do you think that they should be? I mean, I do remember actually you did mention previously that a big part of the punishment of people like Anders Behring Breivik is a loss of freedoms. Like he can't get to decide like a lot of the stuff. He doesn't have. He obviously doesn't have access to firearms anymore, so he can't go and like shoot people. So to that end of things, it's like, do you think that if this person is with other inmates, do you think that the thief should have the uh, ability to steal from other people before they're finally rehabilitated?
um, again, I just want to be certain here before I answer because I, well, I'm going to answer. Um, of course, they shouldn't be able to steal, but we cannot change what they're what they are going to do if they fundamentally believe that they should steal, then they will steal again, and then they will be thrown in prison again, and it will be a higher sentence because they are career criminals.
So
And if they decide to stop doing crimes, well, then we've succeeded in rehabilitating them in society.
if they stop going back to committing those kinds of crimes, then yes, they've been rehabilitated. But if somebody like even while they're if somebody doesn't change, like if there's an ongoing effort to try to change them for the better, like rehabilitation, and they're just insistent on continuing committing that crime, then the argument that I'm advocating for is not one of retribution, it's one of incapacitation. That is to say, they should be physically prevented from being able to commit that crime anymore. Because I care a lot more about preventing these people from hurting other people or harming society in so far as like I wouldn't want this person to be continually able to steal, so you like maybe put them in solitary confinement so they can't do that. Maybe maybe being in solitary confinement would be upsetting to this individual, but I care a lot more about their victims than about failing to trying and failing to fix somebody that has no internal drive to change. Because at the end of the day, human life is not something that you can quantitatively put value on as an atheist, and we have like millions of people in this country. Killing off or just losing a few really doesn't matter. That might sound cold, but again, like if you're talking to an atheist, how are you going to convince them that human life is objectively valuable?
If we have to be objective, human life doesn't matter.
That's
Human life does not matter. Every single day, people die.
and that,
Every single day, people are raped. People are tortured. Every single day, human lives does not matter in the big picture.
exactly.
But as a moral thing, it does matter.
But that's the problem
It
is that
matters. It matters that we treat people with dignity
the
because we are a society of dignity people.
the treating people with dignity in terms of like a rehabilitation system in prison, like from my perspective, it's more about this is more effective at stopping recidivism than throwing them into a massive concrete box full of people that they gotta watch out for that'll probably like attack them or manipulate them, etc. Um, because it's not that I don't care about any other human at all, but a remorseless hardened criminal, if like any attempt to rehabilitate them fails, if every attempt to fix them and rehabilitate them fails, then get like I would be more interested in just stopping them so they can't continuing to hurt people by any means necessary than I would value that individual's life, because it becomes not worth the effort, especially when you can't quantitatively prove that their life is worth anything. Now, like victims of, all those victims of rape and all those other crimes, I think that their lives are more valuable because, and this may just be my opinion, but it's also the opinion of many other people in the Western Hemisphere, as you might well notice. Like, the average person, we value, human life generally speaking, but when they demonstrate that they are people that we really don't like, their value goes down. Can we quantitatively prove that in like a flow chart or like a bar graph and back it up with like a divine right? No. It's like you have your values across the ocean, we have our values, the Africans have their values, the Asians have their values. And I'm not saying that this is all divided by continental borders. I don't want to say that it's divided by race because you know, obviously it's a matter of culture. We have different cultures, we have different feelings, we have different values, and you really can't it's really hard to quantitatively value this stuff beyond saying this is the thing that you do to get these kinds of results. That's all I want to say on that.
Okay. Um, but when would you say it's fair to say we can't rehabilitate them? Is it one sentence? Is it two sentences? Is it three? When do we not care anymore?
This is kind of complicated to answer because I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not like a official who deals with these kinds of people. Like like when it comes to stealing, for example, it's like if somebody stole something like like stealing once, I don't think is worthy of eternal condemnation. But it's like if this is a repeat offender, well, I suppose like if is this is kind of difficult to answer because the person that I was referring to was a repeat offender who committed like a number of other kinds of crimes, and you're right. He probably wasn't. There was probably no attempt to rehabilitate him in jail. If anything, that kind of environment just made him worse. But if somebody is has a long-standing pattern of committing these types of crimes, if there's an attempt, a genuine attempt to rehabilitate them, and we did everything that we could, if this is a system that generally rehabilitates people, but you have somebody who just figures out a way to fight the system and refuses to change, then they're just not really worth the effort. It's one human. We've got 350 million people. We're not in danger of running out anytime soon, especially when we've got people on our southern border and from the from Asia, like trying to get their way into this country. Even with Trump like doing his like ICE raids and you know harassing people who were merely just traveling between the United States and other countries. There, like I remember seeing a YouTube video, for example, of some one of these cringy YouTubers saying, we're gonna get in this caravan, we're gonna try to sneak into the United States while the ICE raids were going on. It's like, why are so many people trying to get in here? But that's besides the point. I think I kind of delivered the message that I wanted to get across, and you also gave me the answer that I was looking for.
Okay.
The one last thing that I do want to say, and this is more lighthearted and fun. This is not as serious as the previous discussions we were having. I know that you're Danish and you speak Danish. I don't speak a single word of Danish, but do you know any German?
Yeah, I do.
Ooh.
But
Uh,
my German is not as good as my English.
ja, ich verstehe. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, aber nicht so viel. Aber ich mache mein Bestes geben.
That's good.
Danke, Sir.
Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, aber es war viele Jahre, als ich Deutsch, als ich Deutsch sprach. Yeah, I can't remember the sentences. I need um, to use my language more. I have a pretty good I have a quite good German when I've used it for a few weeks, but it's been I guess 10 years since I've last spoken a word of German.
Yeah. When I was in, so when I was in school, when I was in elementary school, middle school, and in the beginning of high school, they were trying to really like teach us how to speak Spanish because that's we border a bunch of Spanish speaking countries and that's the most useful second language for us to learn. But I'll admit I wasn't so interested in it. When I was in high school, I got really interested in learning how to speak German, so I took a German class, and I took German classes when I was in community college, and it's a lot harder to learn than Spanish, but I think I know how to speak more German than Spanish probably, and I also know how to speak a little bit of Russian.
But it's interesting. You think it's easier with Spanish because English is a Germanic language.
German has a lot of rules to it, and I do remember kind of struggling to learn, and even like the sentence one of the sentences that I said to you was something that I memorized reading off of Google Translate admittedly, but I think I have better memory of the German that I learned because it's more recent, whereas like when I was learning Spanish, like a lot of it was in middle school, and it's like it was so long ago that I really don't remember it as well. But um I my biggest hurdle aside from struggling with using correct grammar in German is just me not having a very expansive vocabulary. I know a
Mm.
few. I know some word. I know some words and phrases, and I know how to pronounce the letters, but I don't know that many words and phrases. So after a while, I can only carry a conversation so far before I like run out of words I know.
It's similar to Danish.
Yeah, I mean they're both Germanic languages.
It is, and they are, but we also have some of the North Germanic, where South Germanic is the language of German. Uh, Proto-Scandinavian, I think it's called. We also have um, uh, words from there, but our language has developed a lot, and German is great parts of our language. So you have some similar words which can be used both in Danish and in German.
Yeah, it would be nice if like if in the United States we put an effort into learning like Spanish the way Europeans learn English, because it's like I, I I I can only speak English fluently. English is the only language that I know how to that I could carry a conversation in. I know a little bit of Spanish, French, German, Russian, and Mandarin, and to various extents, but none of those languages I know enough. I have enough vocabulary, and none of those languages that are not my primary language did I ever learn how to speak those languages to the point where I could carry a conversation for very long, because I my vocabulary is limited.
And it is difficult to use language you you've not used it in a conversation for years. So I can still I can still feel and hear that my English pronunciation is a bit awkward at times, but it's because I've not really spoken English. It's more writing in English than having a conversation. But I can easily hold one. But yeah,
You do have an accent, but your English is much better than my Danish. I don't know. I don't know a word of Danish, and the few languages that I have dabbled in learning, I haven't learned how to speak or write in those languages to a point where I can say that I'm fluent in them. And maybe that's just like
don't take your time to learn Danish. Learn Danish.
I'd probably
It's not worth it.
I would well, I do appreciate your humility. Like I do, because like if I'm gonna be totally honest, as an American, like the language that would be the most useful for me to learn would probably be Spanish, just because like we in the Western Hemisphere, most of the Western Hemisphere speak Spanish, and we border several Spanish-speaking countries. Puerto Rico is a territory of ours, and the people there speak Spanish. Like it's even if I wasn't really consistently interested in learning how to speak Spanish, because I've just found French and German, Russian, and Mandarin to be more interesting, Spanish is the most useful for us to learn. And the people that live around people that, like, people from Spanish speaking countries who come here, they tend to learn how to speak Spanish to a greater extent than I would. Like, people that border Mexico, for example, would like people living in states that border Mexico will probably end up knowing how to speak more Spanish than somebody from my state, New Jersey, where like we're nowhere near the border.
It's true. But have you always lived in New Jersey?
Yeah,
Or
I have never I have never lived outside my home state.
okay,
Well, I think that that was a highly enlightening discussion,
that
and I got you the answers that you were looking for,
sure thing.
and
I think it was very interesting.
you taught me quite a few things as well.
Do you have A short subject, which we could uh, look at or discuss.
At the moment, no. All I want to
No,
say is, I mean, I think that pretty much covered everything that I can think of at the moment. I think that Americans and Europeans in general should have more discussions like this because it's like, you know, that's an effective way for us to work out our differences. Than, I mean, I know Twitter is not real life, Reddit's not real life, but it just seems like there's a lot of talking across each other and people like casting hasty generalizations towards each other instead of like thoroughly discussing these things the way we did.
yeah, and it's difficult because it's always the fringes which have the most most time in media. Your most I can't find the words here.
The squeaky wheel.
It
The phrase that people like to use is the squeaky wheel gets the grease because
yeah.
people that say ridiculous stuff, they farm engagement, they get the clicks, they attract the attention, and the people that are acting normal don't to the same degree.
So I I believe I'm a moderate in Denmark. I
Mm-hmm.
would classify myself as a social democrat, but a right-leaning social democrat. I have uh, I believe in tough borders, strict borders. I believe in having an economy which is not built on debt. I believe in a society that takes care of those who have the least, and that everyone deserves the dignity to live a life where they have healthcare and they have the ability to get a good education. And that's and when I look at the US, I I don't think I would necessarily believe that I am only a Democrats. I would also find things in the old Republican Party which I would agree with.
Yeah, I mean, in within the United States, like I've been labeled typically as like a moderate by American standards. Obviously, like I'm pretty sure if I was if I was airlifted into Europe, I would probably be considered like very right wing. Um, but you know,
Do you think that I still haven't heard you say anything very right wing? I believe the discussions we have regarding borders in Denmark and regarding integration and migration, immigration are quite tough, and Americans would be appalled with the discussions we have. I wouldn't classify it as racism. It is our discussions are about culture and not the color of your skin, but it would still be very right wing in regards to the left Americans who perceive it as some kind of racism.
I mean, the thing about those left wing Americans is that they're either insulated from the realities of living around those people, or they will look at the all that violence and be like, yeah, no, we're on that side of things. Uh, I don't know. It's kind of a mess. I mean, maybe that could be a discussion for like another time, because you did say that you needed to wrap it up relatively
Yeah,
soon.
Yeah, I think I have 20 minutes to go.
Oh, okay.
So just before we leave, how what do you think is going to happen in the next few days? Are you going to warn
Oh, you mean in terms of like, uh,
Iran?
what do I think? I mean, I remember back in the fall, Israel and Iran were shooting missiles at each other, and it's like my thinking is this could go any which way. And back then, they shot a bunch of missiles at each other. They hit each other, and it just kind of ended, and not in World War III. My hopes that this is going to be another nothing burger, but it could always escalate much further than that. I I'm going to be honest with you. The conflict between Israel and Iran, I'm not super personally invested in. Other than I really hope that these two don't start a catalyst that starts World War III that ends the world.
I agree. I agree. I think I really don't like any side of the conflict.
I mean,
I'm not against Israel as a state, and I think you have people on both sides of the discussion of Israel Palestine being wrong. I think Netanyahu is a monster. I believe the settlements on the West Bank
or
is
genocide.
insane. They are insane. I think some of some of the bombs in Gaza have been abundant, too much killings. But in it is it is the fault of Hamas that you have the war. It is Hamas which could release the hostages if they stay alive. It's uh, and the regarding the Palestinian issue, Arabic nations in the Middle East also have some fault in it. They This conflict could have been ended long ago. It could have been ended long ago if the Palestinians had taken the deal, which was made in the 90s and in the start of the century. But yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah, I'm not super fond of the the current Iranian government. When I hear about like they banned, I mean, this is not super surprising because it's a theocratic government, but they ban contraceptives for both men and women. They have a systemic rape of female prisoners in order to deny them virtue to God when they die or something like that. It's just like what the actual fuck.
Yeah,
So I'm
but
not I
I agree with that.
like
But as well. I'm not against bombing Iran as such. I'm against bombing Iran if you don't have a plan, as you didn't have a plan in Iraq,
I
and that's where we are today.
yeah no like I'm not advocating I know that me only can like I don't want that to sound as though like I want to have have a electric boogaloo of what happened in Iraq because that was really bad. That happened when I was in elementary school, so I can't be blamed for Bush getting in office. Um, but it's like I would prefer de-escalation generally, but I also understand why people hate the Iranian government because they are very oppressive towards their own people. They've got Hezbollah going around causing problems, and I mean, I'm generally sympathetic to Israel as a country because it's the one and only Jewish country, and you could argue that the way they came into existence was, oh well, the Jews kind of kicked out the Palestinians that were living there, but it's like where else were the Jews supposed to go? It's like every country on planet Earth is taken in. Like they were trying to inhabit Germany, and then Nazism, the Nazis committed genocide against them. So it's like where are Jews supposed to go where they have a homeland of their own, where they're not basically just under the thumb of someone else? Where it's like, oh, don't worry about safety, like we'll protect you, and then that government disappears, and then it gets replaced by Nazis, which is exactly what happened in Europe. Um,
Yeah,
so I,
yeah, uh,
I,
yeah. Continue.
but Benjamin Netanyahu is undoubtedly unnecessarily escalating the conflict, and the settlers, you know, are essentially committing genocide. The settlers are part of a genocide against a targeted genocide of the Palestinian people for sure. However, I'm not sympathetic to the Qatari government, where like there were even Palestinian civilians were like really pissed off at the Prince of Qatar. It's like, oh, you want us to continue to not accept like aid that we desperately need because it's politically convenient for the Prince of Qatar that we suffer. While the Prince of Qatar, he's got like multiple jets, he's living in luxury, and while we suffer, it's like. So I do think that there is a difference between voicing sympathy for Palestinian people and while still like versus being sympathetic to the government of Qatar and the terrorists, because I think that you can be sympathetic to the Palestinian civilians who didn't do anything wrong, who don't deserve what's happening to them by the Israeli government, and still, because the thing is, the Israel, I believe the IDF like 10 years ago or so. Oh, there was like there were terrorists in some elementary school. Like here in the United States, if something like that happens, we send like a team of people to go take out the terrorist or the person holding people hostage. The IDF, let's just blow up the entire school full of children and other civilians. It's like that is just unacceptable.
And that's how easy it was to agree on one of the most messy messy conflicts in the world.
Yeah,
We don't have to agree on every single thing, but we agree on the big picture in the on the big picture of this conflict, and that's if people spoke with each other, really spoke with each other, they would understand that nothing is black and white, and you would actually be able to find common ground on such conflicts, especially in for people protesting in the United States or in Europe, for that matter.
I think it also helps that when it comes to the is like the conflicts regarding Israel, I'm not particularly personally invested in a particular side, and I know that that sounds like something that you should never do. But the men's rights stuff that we talked about earlier, and some of the other topics we talked about earlier, I'm more personally invested in. Whereas like this, it's like I look at the situation, and I'm like just looking at every single side and what they're doing right and wrong, and it's just like yeah, like this is like it's pretty. It's it is kind of complicated, but I don't think I have to be like completely on the side of one country or another when I see people don't like me saying there's good and bad people on both sides, but that basically is what it is. Because I don't want the only Jewish country to disappear, but I also know that they got a government right now that's doing things that are really wrong.
But I also think it's a problem that the only Jewish country in the world think they speak for all Jews in the world. They don't do that.
They don't.
They can't do that.
They don't. It's just that it's the only country that is like majority Jewish that was explicitly created to be a homeland for Jews. They do have a bad government right now, but that could always
It's not going
change.
to change. It's not going to change. If you can see, if you look at the statistics regarding how many children Moderates get versus how many children Orthodox Jews get in in Israel, you will see it will only get worse. It will only get worse. but that's it. Can't do anything about it.
I'm a lot more personally in,
It's
I'm a lot more invested in the Ukraine Russia conflict, where it's very clear that Ukraine are the good guys and the Russian government is clearly in the wrong. Like, Ukraine didn't do anything to deserve having the Russian government invade them. Like, the Ukrainians are really lovely people. I like their government isn't perfect, but the Russian government are mustache twirling villains. They're fucking evil, and their military commits all kinds of war crimes, whereas the Ukrainian military are essentially liberators. Like the Ukraine Russia conflict, I'm very invested in. The Whereas like conflicts like the Kivu conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where Rwanda is involved, that one's a little bit less clear cut because it's very complicated. And the conflict between Israel and Iran, I don't think there's really any good guys in that. Even if I do want Jews to have a homeland of their own, so that way there's a country they could call home if they're experiencing genocide in whatever country they came from. Like right now, it's right now like life for Jews in the United States is decent, but it wasn't always like that. There was a time where Jews were being targeted in the United States. United States propaganda against Nazi Germany usually focused on Nazi Germany being a dictatorship, and they didn't focus on the Holocaust, even when we knew like a little bit about it, because a lot of Americans hated Jews at the time.
I think the biggest worry about this conflict is the amount of anti-Semitism which which will just increase, and it's very very dangerous for Jews, in particular in Europe and in some regards also in the US, to live free and use their religious symbols without being targeted. In schools and Jewish schools and Jewish school in Copenhagen is guarded by guards by armed policemen.
Yeah,
It's the only school which is protected by armed policemen. All other schools are just open. No no sign-ins or anything. You can just walk in
yeah.
without no problem.
It's unfortunate, but that seems to be the state of affairs that we have now.
Well, that was sorry. That was a very glum discussion to end on.
Yeah, but it's a good
Yeah,
one. It's a good one. I
yeah,
feel like this was. I think that this was probably more enlightening than the previous one.
yeah, yeah. Sure. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this just as much.
Let's see if we can find some time in the next few weeks.
hmm I don't have any firm plans set in stone yet, but I'll let you know if things change.
Yeah, we'll just find a day.